Hello and welcome to our October Spotlight webinar with Syxsense. Today, we have our industry expert, John Cassell, here to give us an inside look into our status as a leader and an outperformer in our 2023 GigaHome Radar report, and how our platform can streamline security and provide continuous control through patch automation and vulnerability remediation for diverse environments and workforces. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat, and John will reach out after to answer those. And with that, John Cassell.
All right, welcome everybody. That's quite the title there. We'll be covering quite a few different aspects of Syxsense today, and where we fit into the market and specific segment patch management. The reason that I actually chose that title in a way was that I don't want to just focus on patch management alone. Given that we'll cover in just a second, our report actually focuses as well a little bit on vulnerability remediation, specific to one of our tiers, Syxsense Enterprise, which would include a lot more than just patch management alone. We're going to look at the automation side of things as well. And I would say, if I were to label this correctly, the subtopic of today will be specifically around diverse workplace. Not just in terms of our architecture being a SaaS product and our ability to manage devices from anywhere, but specifically different operating systems within, say, a particular workflow. Before we jump into that, though, you should all be seeing my screen at the moment. We're going to go through the GigaOM Radar report for 2023. And again, this is specific to patch management and where Syxsense fits into the market. There are a number of areas of criteria, rather, that of course were assessed, not just for us, but many other players in the market today, in the industry, I should say in general. Many of them are not just patch management, like ourselves. Many are more of a suite-based solution that offer a lot of other features too. This is, of course, broken down in terms of smaller to mid-market or SMB business, large enterprise, and as well MSPs and service providers in general are still considered here as being an audience or rather a potential customer of the solutions. It's also broken down into three different deployment models. We have SaaS, self-managed, and hybrid, and multi-cloud. Syxsense fits into this strictly as a SaaS solution. Nothing needs to be hosted on-premise per se. There are plenty of deployment models that we do support, as well as proxy and relay architecture. So it's really not a necessity to have to host the solution on-premise. And as part of our subscription, we offer multi-tenancy, redundancy, all the operations, of course, managing the tenant. So it's not really a requirement, of course, and we don't want to force that onto our customers to have to host it themselves. So where we fit in, of course, compared to a few other players, self-managed, hybrid, multi-cloud, of course, on-premise is not a requirement. It's not our model in general. There are many other factors as well too, in which we'll see. I'll visualize the whole report in a second. But other factors as well as where we fit in, and as well different operating systems, because it's going to be broken down not just to say, hey, patch management across one operating system, but particular to many others as well. This is definitely where Syxsense, one factor I should say, where Syxsense shines within the market. It's that we cover all of them. Different ways, of course, and parity differences in what we would consider managing Windows versus Mac OS versus Linux. A lot of the other players are going to do it the same. For some of these operating systems, there's no real way to inject a replacement process or substitute for the channel or repository that they're already leveraging. So we'll see a bit of that when we get into our automation workflow and into the console for the second half of today's call. But in general, of course, we do satisfy requirements for patch management of all of the operating systems. Key criteria, again, now that we're kind of into the more general space, not just patch deployment, but a little bit more of a granular route with that, agent-based versus agentless, inventory information, which should not be overlooked when it comes to patching. I would expect every patch deployment product or tool or a general solution to have some sort of type of asset tracking. When I look at patching, and I've been explaining it for training, not just training, but as well building strategies for customers for almost 10 years now, there are three common questions if we were to really break it down, and that's simply where to target, what is it we're going to do, and when we're going to perform it. And then there are a lot of other possibilities, which we'll look at when we get into our workflow. That first question, though, is where are we going to target? And inventory is, of course, a very important aspect to it, because our inventory can change. And when we build out strategies across a very diverse environment, we might want to split those strategies too. Lifecycle management, patch testing, patch deployment, prioritization, all aspects that Syxsense does extremely well. Evaluation metrics, some of these are going to, of course, factor into it when we look at the report in just a moment. Nothing needs to be highlighted here in terms of being a challenge for us. And then emerging tech, we do have quite a bit coming out within the next year or so. I'll follow up with that in just a sec when we get into the details of how they assessed Syxsense. We are quite strong here, though, on the security side of things, not requiring authenticated scans per se on premise, but rather direct to the client to perform a more efficient scan, not requiring network scanners on premise. And then we'll talk to you a little bit on AI. I'm just going to make a few comments on that as we only got a 1 on there, but that's okay. We'll look at, of course, we've already addressing that for the future. So in looking at the report, or rather the graphic, this is broken down in a few different ways. We have our x-axis and our y-axis, and they're going to, of course, be a sliding spectrum in terms of few specific areas. Platform play is our ability to, or I'll say the general ability to support various operating systems. And again, one of the main subtopics today, look at diversity. Feature play here is really just going to focus on what specifically can you do very well. Product like Sysward is extremely competent at Linux patching, but doesn't offer a diverse approach in terms of your general environment. Really would only apply, I would say, generally to the industry infrastructure teams that are only using Linux. So Windows Server administrators, any other OS out there, you're kind of out of luck. The y-axis is going to look in terms of whether we're focusing more on new features or, I would say, maturity. I kind of think of maturity as stability. And of course, we'll look at the players and where we fit in here in just a second. We also have a few rings that you might see in different colors here. An entrant to even be recognized on the report. Challengers, going to be this first kind of slight gray circle. And then the leaders are in the center. And we'll go through a few of the leaders, of course, in this space. We also have each manufacturer or vendor or product that's being recognized here in 3 different additional colors. And there's an arrow as well to kind of pinpoint where they're headed. Forward movers are basically anyone that's considered an entrant, but not quite so strong in terms of the metrics above. Fast movers, a little bit better. They are measuring higher on those metrics. And then outperformers, there are only 2, and Syxsense was recognized as being one of them. We can also see that Syxsense is a leader as well as an outperformer, and we are headed towards the center. The dead center of this particular graph would basically be a perfect patch management product. It's impossible to get there, and not just because, hey, no product can ever be perfect at it, but the key feature of patch management alone always consists of evolution. That's what patches are. That's what updates are to our systems. So how can you possibly have a perfect product when systems change their deployment scenarios? We know Microsoft does that. So every year they're going to do something different and introduce a new model to it. Hey, we had semi-annual releases. Now we have annual. Well, great. You made things easier, but it's still a different process. Easier now than it used to be, but there's always some type of change. And that's what patches introduce as well, changes. When we're looking at diversity as well, we're looking at many different manufacturers making a change to their process and how they support their operating systems. And then an outlier here, I would say as well, the industry might make recommendations. We might have compliance differences. Zero trust approach is definitely going to be changing. It's already in place for many, but it's definitely shifting the market towards a different perspective. So I wouldn't really say that anyone can ever truly be in the center when it comes to patch management alone. But we're trying to get, of course, very close to that. And we can see here that, again, Syxsense is an outperformer, reaching the center because we are maturing our operating system support, adding more, of course, whenever we hear about them, additional OS versions of Linux, retiring or deprecating old versions of Windows and providing immediate support for the next version, so on and so forth. Just a few others to highlight here, and I don't want to bash anybody particularly, but there are some players, of course, they're going to be more on that mature side, but then as well, not too diverse, but not too specialized. And one thing we'll look at in just a sec when we get into the workflow designer is that we offer that complexity, or I would say we add significant possibilities without adding unnecessary complexity. So we can get very specific in terms of other use cases, mixing them into our patch management approach. And again, an advantage of being a suite-based solution, patch management's not the only thing that we provide. It's something we've done extremely well for many years now, and there's a lot of information I'll provide in a second to support that. But it also includes software distribution, vulnerability scanning, many remediations that we include with patching along with that. So patch management is not the only thing we support to resolve a vulnerability. There are many other mitigations that would come along with it. I'm going to go ahead and skip all of the other manufacturers in the listing and their assessment and just jump straight to Syxsense as a few things I want to highlight, and a reason why I specifically latched onto the diversity aspect for today's webcast, and when we build our workflow, where that kind of fits into things. They are recognizing Syxsense Enterprise as being the strong solution here. We have 3 different tiers of the solution. When it comes to patching, patching is actually offered in all 3. It's just a matter of how complex or how, I would say, conditional or dependent would you like patch management to be across other aspects. And that's where we go higher in a tool or in the tool set with our tiers, more focus on vulnerabilities, more focus on, say, adding MDM into our mix. And then as well, in general, I would just say it's a higher focus on security and automation. You can still patch in Syxsense Manage. The content and repos and everything would still be the exact same, although there would be additional capabilities around scheduling, restrictions, policies that would be offered in higher tiers, offering better efficiency. But I wouldn't necessarily say better effectiveness unless there were caveats that we wanted to scan in the environment to make sure that, hey, if you wanted to perform 4 reboots in a row, but not get to patching until all 4 reboots took place, that would be a higher tier type feature where we can customize the design of our use case. The strength right here at the bottom, Syxsense Enterprise is a strong patch and security management tool, well suited to diverse environments. It's why we floated more to the right side of that at platform play, but not necessarily being specific towards any operating system that, say, we do very well, but we don't do others. Combination of patching, security, and compliance management capabilities creates the strong solution. We still have compliance reports in lower tiers, but fitting into compliance, other compliance needs, I would say, like CIS level 1 and 2, DISA STIG, post-patching mitigations, those are all features offered in the higher tiers. So that's why Syxsense Enterprise was again recognized here. The challenge, and I said I didn't want to hide this, looking at the future, currently, I should say actually, no AI model at the moment, but that is something that we are addressing, not even within the next year, not even the next 6 months, but we're probably 3 to 6 months away. And that will allow for better capabilities in metadata being pulled and manipulated if ever necessary in terms of patch information to pull that dynamically. We already have an internal team that does a lot of this for us already, and it would, of course, enhance their capabilities and as well for security teams specifically to have access to our console, more ability to make those changes themselves. And then as well, all of our training, all of our documentation will now be powered by AI very shortly. So just wanted to highlight the one challenge here that they had recognized, and we've already addressed that. It's something we're already looking into, and we'll be releasing at some point very soon. Now, MSPs for us are really no different than, say, direct business. A little blurb here talking about our professional services and as well what we appeal to with MSPs. The console is designed the exact same. It gives individual companies to manage their environments in very different ways, like a service provider. So naturally, MSPs would have that same functionality, as that's typically what they require. So for today's spotlight, what I wanted to again focus on is patch management, of course, that's what the report is focused on, but as well diverse environments specifically, and how we can actually design a workflow to do something pretty cool for us. I'm going to switch tabs over here and bring up the Syxsense portal. This is my demonstration site. If you see my health, or if you have access to a console already, or you've seen it before, I know I'm in a very unhealthy state. So I'm just going to mention that first. We're going to go into the automation editor and build a workflow to help us with patch management, but allow multiple operating systems to be targeted. I say this as myself looking at, say, infrastructure versus end users. I would probably design 2 different flows and deviations of a patch management process, but it is absolutely possible to have one workflow sent out to various operating systems to perform patching, say, at the exact same time. So that's what we're going to latch onto here, although it may not be always best practice for some, and especially if there are multiple teams using the same solution, they can build out their own profiles and policies and segment them out in their own way. For example, we probably may not want to patch servers at the exact same time as workstations, but we're going to do that within our example. I'm going to go ahead and create a workflow. And the workflow allows me to not just take a simple route towards patching. That's one of our amazing benefits in even our base tier Syxsense Manage, the ability to just run a patch deploy task. Although that's just filling in some values, is saying where, what, when, like mentioned earlier, and maybe you want to reboot. If we want added capabilities like dependencies, conditionality, a lot of other features thrown into the same mix with patching, that's where we want to use Cortex to instead automate a lot of this for us, not just in terms of when it gets kicked off, but allowing a device to take a flow, take a path down a different route. If something fails, we can catch that and allow it to take a different path, not just tell us, hey, something had failed, maybe due to disk space. We can measure that in the beginning. At the very top, I'm actually just going to drag this in. OS platform check will be our very first action. Before I actually go further, there are some advanced actions I think I'm going to use in this one too. So I'm actually going to go ahead and call this, I already called one diverse patching, so we'll call it version 2. And I'm going to make sure that advanced actions are on. It's just a flag here to protect some very complex actions, but a few of them I think I'm going to use today for this example. So it expands the Cortex library quite heavily, actually. There are dozens more actions added to my listing, which will allow us to get more in depth with the registry, running specific script languages, which I think we're going to want to do when we're looking at multiple operating system versions. I had the intention of talking about servers in this example, but I think I'm actually going to go ahead and scrap that. Linux would be, of course, considered probably most likely a server. So we are going to include that in the mix, but I think just to save some time for today, I'm going to go ahead and not focus on Windows Server for this example. So we're just going to talk about workstations on Windows and Mac, and then Linux will allow it to take a different route, which technically you can still patch your Windows servers the same as you do your workstations. You just probably wouldn't do that because, of course, it's probably another team, but as well, the timing is the most critical aspect to that. So after we've done our OS check, first thing we want to do is allow devices to take a different route. Now, the reason I'm just going to skip this is it's a lot more that I was going to throw into my example today. There is a check for Windows Server, which would ensure that Windows Server devices are not targeted. I'm actually just going to use this here to ensure that, yes, we'll run a Windows Server check. If the answer is yes, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm not going to take that path today. But if the answer is no, we would want to go forward with a patch deploy for these systems. Now, there are different ways of doing patching. Very general term there. Different ways of handling patching, or of course, performing patch management across our fleet. One of the actions is pre-included, called scan and deploy. That ensures that we will scan the listing of what's been approved and deploy from any of those available updates if it is necessary. So rather than force ourselves to take a two-phased approach, which is of course an option, I'm going to skip that phase here for Windows workstations and simply say scan for everything and deploy whatever is required. The cool part about it, though, and looking back at that report, one of the metrics was, just to kind of skip back here real fast, patch prioritization and third-party or in-house applications and trusted repositories. It is possible, of course, once we look at the action itself, the only question it has in terms of what is it that you want to patch? I'm not going to get specific here, but there are so many different possibilities in terms of CVSS scores, vendor severity, looking at patching dynamically through the use of queries, like a collection against a patch content set, or maybe we want to group them instead. I don't want to get too complex. I'll let the system determine that, as it is actually the most popular approach for our customers. Allow all updates to be approved and allow any of those updates, if necessary, to then be installed. So we'll keep that fairly easy. We're also going to go ahead and run a reboot check right after, which is another action here. Is a reboot needed? Upon success, or if nothing was actually required, we want to run a reboot check anyways. And if a reboot is necessary, we're going to drag that in. Since we would consider these end user workstations or laptops, we're going to also not drag in just an instant reboot, but rather have a customizable interface so that they can validate, they can see it, they can prepare. We'll give them 60 minutes of inactivity, no ability to cancel out of this reboot, and we'll allow them 15-minute timers up to 4 times to defer. This ensures that us as administrators still have control of it, but they have the ability to opt out or not opt out per se, defer for a certain amount of time. After the reboot is successful, the last thing we would have to do for Windows specific devices, we don't have to actually, but I just like to add this in just for notification's sake. We'll send an email. We're going to send the email to me and we'll just simply say that Windows workstation patching is successful. We do offer variable support, but for the sake of time today, I won't get that in depth with it. We could actually call out the workstation name, the username, the department. There are a lot of additional capabilities we can throw into that email. We'll keep it fairly simple today. If the reboot was not necessary, though, we would want to double input to the same, so we don't have to keep designing additional actions and then start being redundant. So we'd want to reuse that same notification whether or not the reboot was actually required. That's our path for Windows workstations. That's all it would really require in this case. Let's look at the next segment down, and that would be patching Mac OS. We can actually do the same thing. Now, with Windows devices, we include a lot of pre-vetted content directly from manufacturers, since Windows historically by far has been one of the trickiest operating systems to patch. Gives administrators, of course, a headache, gives the end user a headache because we're trying to chase them down and ensure that reboots are taking place. Our difference in content, of course, would exist right here. Windows updates are supplied by us from the vendor. We don't replace, however, on the Apple side, and it's just because of licensing. It's the way Apple does things. So when we contact a Mac OS device or many devices at once, it's just simply going to ask that device from its software update pre-built detection in the existing Apple channel, what do you need? We're still going to tap into that by running a scan. We're also going to automate the next step to say, well, whatever Apple's telling you need, go ahead and deploy. With that being said, it is possible in case a version upgrade is in the listing, we can block that. We just want to build out a quick query that would work around those cases where that might exist. In this case, though, I'm just going to skip that and we're just going to go forward with a full deployment. After the patch deploy is successful, we can again include a reboot. We could actually skip all the effort of redesigning this down to that email. And one thing that I wanted to do here is actually just remove the Windows part of the email at the very end. And we're actually going to pipe in all of the same into the reboot needed question. So not having to be per se redundant, we can certainly allow a different path if we want a different email to be delivered at the very end, Mac versus Windows, but we're actually going to go ahead and just, for lack of a better term, microwave it and allow the same path to be taken. The more interesting side, though, that I wanted to cover today as well is including Linux into the mix. And I am going to take a few steps back and allow this to be more of a two-phased approach for a good reason. Before we get to deployment, maybe we want to run an Ansible playbook. So first, we're going to run essentially our yum update or apt-get update command. And we'll go ahead and again say anything that's necessary. After that is thrown in here, we now want to run something different. And this is what we would consider, again, a prerequisite to our patching process. I have a lot of various files that are already uploaded in my storage. I'm going to use my Ansible playbook file. And I'm going to drag the install in if something is detected, or if nothing is, if it is detected, in this case, because I was almost connected the wrong direction. Only if something is detected will we run the playbook. If nothing is detected, we're going to stop. It means if patches are not in the repo being necessary, that's all we have to do. After the playbook is specifically successful, we will now run a patch deploy. Upon success of that script, we can again just say target all packages. Now, it wasn't, again, a necessity to do our pre-scan. I just want to show the power there where we can run detection, and only if something is detected will we then take the next step. And then we would go ahead and run detection and deployment again. Fortunately for Linux, their detection is insanely fast. Really only takes a few seconds. Windows, we know, is a totally different story in general. It's how their operating system kind of functions. But in this case, our redetection would not really be very inefficient anyway. After that takes place, we can run other files. We can include additional scripts. If we want to run a bash script, perfectly fine. We do support them. We don't have to actually throw a file down in that case either. We could just drag a bash script action in directly as maybe the success of this particular deployment. I don't have really a script handy at the moment, so we'll just go ahead and say hello world. And I'm definitely not following syntax for bash there, but it's again just an example. That would be our post-deployment action, whether or not packages were actually installed. At that point, whatever it is that we were attempting to prepare using our script method, whether it be an Ansible playbook using Python, or it's using a bash script or another language if we were looking at Windows Server, would allow for the prerequisite action to take place. And just a quick plug to a lot of the other features we have here, which would not involve scripting. We can check services. We can stop the service first. We can make a change to the registry all before we make a significant change, of course, to the operating system with the OS patches. In this case, though, to keep things simple at the very end, we can actually pipe this into the same email. I was thinking of going down a different route in this case, but I think in this example, I can actually just take the success here and once again pipe it into the reboot. If there are failures, though, I'll use that as a separate example, I think. If, say, our Linux box failed for any reason, or boxes, this can, of course, be many, I'd want to, again, get another notification, and I will use a variable here since it looks like I do have another minute or two. Our variable of device name, Linux patching failure. And it's most likely due to, say, a repo issue, maybe licensing, or down to disk space. I didn't cover it today, but disk space is an easy action we could throw in there. So again, to prepare ourselves and get less errors and less failures in the long run, we could have checked for that proactively. So in this case, we are allowing for a success email to come back, a failure email, and a specific route just for Linux. And again, we can include that across all the other actions. We can reuse that same email too. But at the very beginning, this would be one workflow that is designed, again, to patch all of our systems without the need to segregate them or segment them out in another way to say only Linux, only Windows, only Mac OS. That might be your intention in the end, but just to normalize it, at least initially, looking at one workflow that would be capable of patching all of our systems, and as well, in the very end of it, looking at one schedule that we would apply towards the workflow. The last piece to design this and push it out would be to publish a policy or develop a maintenance window. Since there are Linux servers in here too, I'd probably recommend a safer approach to start off with, which might be a maintenance window where we can set daily, weekly, monthly recurrence and as well set a duration to it. But the easier approach, if we say we want to patch all systems approximately every 7 days, we don't have to think about necessarily when it's going to occur. If we wanted to wipe out the whole Linux portion there and separate that out and say Windows workstations, Mac workstations, and maybe Linux workstations too, that would make sense. They would instead be given a policy to patch roughly every 7 days. All dependent on when the device is online. They would be given a single time to run it, and they would just ensure that, of course, they are running within a 7-day cycle. That last question, not to get too in-depth with our inventory, but it is, of course, something we also do very well. We could ask questions across the fleet down to only Linux, only Windows, only Mac, only MDM. If we want to include something else in the mix, we can choose them specifically. But in this case, we would simply want to say all workstations. And the last piece here, just hit save. And that's all we would have to do. One workflow to target all of our operating systems, which I would consider workstations and compute devices, but it can be servers too. But no need to get really granular in terms of every single policy. That might be different for customer to customer, but at least initially, it does not have to be that complex. So hope this is really useful to everyone on the call today. Again, just an example going off of the report. Again, that Syxsense was recognized in patch management as being a leader and an outperformer against, of course, in the industry against the other providers out there. So do recommend take a look at it if you haven't seen the solution just yet. And we do offer a free trial. And as well, probably see my email on the screen. If you have any questions on a technical basis or you want to ask anything more about what I've covered today, please let me know. Thanks everyone for attending.